Good morning everyone. Today I am Dr. Rajni Gaur going to take up another topic from language across the curriculum, and today's topic is types of communication and difference between formal and informal communication, verbal and non-verbal communication. Now the types of communication. Now there are four types of communication: formal communication, informal communication, verbal communication and non-verbal communication. So very first we take up formal communication. So what is the formal communication? It is the type of communication in which interchange of information is done through the predefined channel at a particular or a formal with the predefined content or the curriculum is known as the formal communication. Second is informal communication. Informal communication is a type of communication in which the interchange of information doesn't follow any channel. It can be done at any place. It does not have any predefined objectives, or so it can be in any of the direction. Next is verbal communication. Verbal communication is the communication which is done orally or verbally between two or more than two persons. Non-verbal communication is the communication where the verbal communication does not take place. It may be in the form of written communication. It may be in the form of sign language. Next we move towards the another part of it, that is difference between formal and informal communication. So now we want to differentiate between these two types of communication on the basis of certain dimensions. So the basis of comparison, first one is the meaning. So as I have told in the previous slide, formal communication is a type of communication in which interchange of information is done through the predefined channels. Whereas informal communication is a type of communication in which interchange of information does not follow any channel, is that it stretches in all directions. Effectiveness. Formal communication is more effective as compared to the informal communication because it is planned. Next is time. Formal communication is a time-consuming process because the predefined objectives should be fulfilled with the help of using various techniques in the classroom at a particular time to achieve the predefined goals. Whereas informal communication have any predefined goals and objectives, so it does not have always a purpose, so it is less time consuming. Feedback. In the formal communication, feedback is very slow and it is only given by someone if it is asked. But in informal communication, feedback is faster than the formal communication. Next is credibility. Formal communication is more credible than the informal communication, and it is because the formal communication is always designed or it is always set to achieve some goals and objectives with a particular curriculum, and which is not same in case of informal communication. Nature. Formal communication is authoritarian in nature, whereas informal communication is democratic. In formal communication, teacher asks students or to follow students as per the direction given by her. But in informal communication, everyone has the freedom or the choice to express themselves as they want. Secrecy. Formal communication is a type of communication in which official secrecy is maintained, whereas informal communication is open to all, so no need to maintain secrecy. As we know that in the office or in the classroom, whatever the content is to be communicated and whatever the data is to be maintained, that needs to be kept confidential as per the need and as per the demand of the teaching learning process or the process of organization. Next is cost. Formal communication is expensive or require more cost because for delivering our lecture, for imparting some information to our students, we have a particular place in the form of school or colleges, or we have to use various audio-visual devices in the classroom to deliver our content. For example, LCD projectors, overhead projectors, smart boards, and so on. But in case of informal communication, such type of devices are not required. So it is not expensive and has no cost. Flexibility. Formal communication less or not flexible, whereas informal communication is highly flexible. How come? Because formal communication is always in a particular environment created formally to attain some objectives. So it is predefined and designed in such a manner so as a student has to behave in a particular fashion. That's why formal communication has very less scope for the flexibility. We have to follow a certain timetable. We have a particular lunch break time. We have particular time for a particular subject and so on. But in case of informal communication, such types happen. Next is discipline. In case of formal communication, it is maintained in the organization, whereas in informal communication, it may not maintain the discipline in organization. Speed of formal communication is slow as it follows a specified path, but informal communication is very fast and can be stretches in all directions. But formal communication is always in a particular direction, maybe from teacher to student or from student to teacher. Evidences. Formal communication, it is to be documented. Whatever we are doing in classroom or whatever the activities we are performing in an organization, we have to document those activities or those tasks or the processes. But in case of informal communication, whatever the communication we established with the different people, we do not have or we do not keep any record or document that process in anywhere or at any point of time. It is not required. Flow of information. Information can flow upward or downward direction, means from teacher to student or student to teacher. But in case of informal communication, information can freely flow in all direction and anyone can communicate with any person without following any hierarchy. Now next we move towards the difference between verbal and non-verbal communication. So very first is the types, that is, it is of two types, oral and written. But non-verbal communication, it is of various types like audio, visual, silence, etc. Understanding. Verbal communication is easy to understand as compared to the non-verbal communication, whereas non-verbal communication is quite difficult as compared to the verbal communication to understand. Verbal communication is highly structured, it is predefined, it is pre-decided, and it has some sort of specifications with it. So that's why we can say that it is highly structured. Whereas it is in case of non-verbal communication, the lack of structure is not at all. It is not at all structured, we can say, or it is lack in formal structure. Oral and written form of words used while verbal communication, but in case of non-verbal communication, they doesn't use words for communication, or we communicate with the help of expression or gesture. Types. In case of verbal communication, it is of two types, verbal and written, and then audio and video, audiovisual, etc. Understanding. Verbal communication is easy to understand and non-verbal communication is difficult to understand. Thank you. Hope you have understood the content which I have delivered.